everyone who was around joined in the fun. It's like, oh, the Romans are, getting butchered. Thank God, because they're taking all of our money and, being these vicious, overlords. Some of them are very hardworking. Vespasian used to get up at like 3 a.m. And read, go over the day's work, probably his petitions for the most part, and letters from all of his governors. Read those, sign them. Probably how it works is, there's this semi-professional bureaucracy of slaves and freedmen who surround the emperor. And they receive all the petitions coming in and letters coming in from ambassadors, from governors, and people who want to see the emperor in person. They create a docket pretty much per day, and they know their emperor, know how actually he'll get done, and arrange his schedule around that. But we have some letters written from Marcus Aurelius as a young man before he was emperor to his tutor Fronto. They kind of talk about the emperor or prince at that point on vacation. He's kind of off in his villas, he's reading philosophy and stuff, and riding around in the hills. But it seems like most of the emperors spend a lot of their time either being read letters by their secretaries and like rubber stamping them pretty much like, okay, yes, no, yes, sell, buy, whatever it might be. Or hearing people coming in asking for his judgment. So some emperors work very hard indeed. Justinian is called the sleepless one because he spends all night, just working on his paperwork.
Did they manage? We were talking earlier about like the way other places would pay taxes, and it had a lot to do with the supply chain and, getting raw materials and things like that. And were the emperors like kind of where the buck stops with determining how to allocate resources like that? Or were there layers below them, including but not necessarily the Senate, who were in charge of those things? And, if it went bad, someone's head came off. But other than that, it's whatever.
I mean, the buck ultimately stops at the emperor. He's the ultimate authority. What he says is law, really, when it comes down to it. But there's a famous series of letters from Pliny the Younger, who's a governor in what's now northwestern Turkey, to Trajan about how to govern his province. And Pliny is he's kind of like the kid in the front row of class. He wants to ask every question so you know how smart he is. Like, well, Emperor, I'm ever so conscientious. I'm really looking out for your back here, Trajan. And Trajan's just like, dude, decide it for yourself sometimes. Like, go ahead, I don't care. It's kind of subtext. He's very polite about it. Other things, though, he answers. Pliny's like, okay, here's what you should do, including the Christians. It's the first persecution we have good evidence for. There are some Christians in his province. And he's like, hey, what do I do with these guys? And Trajan's like, here's what you should do. Don't force them to sacrifice, but, if they do, here's how you go about addressing it. And so it's there was direction from above, but in the Roman Empire in general, and in ancient history in general, power is very decentralized. It has to be because there's only so many pigeons to go around. You can't be sending letters and messages.
Yeah,
constantly.
Mark.
When it comes down to it, the emperor has only the power over areas he can control directly, and through his governors, he can control a lot, via letter. But it might take a month for that letter to get there. And so you have to devolve power to governors who themselves only have so much power, and above all to the cities. There's about 2,000 cities in the Roman Empire, and they are really self-governing units. They're the ones who really administer all the territory in the empire.
But you said 2,000?
Yes, about that.
God, that's a lot.
Well, yes and no. You look at how big that area is, and that big map.
Cities, though.
Well, they're called cities. Some are pretty small.
How small do they get?
That could be a few hundred people in some cases, but it's called a city because
the
Roman definition of city is it is an administrative center.
What do we call a city now? I think it's like 100,000 people, right?
It's kind of a rough and fast, hard and fast, or rough and ready rule.
Yeah,
we don't really have any clear definition, I think.
I wasn't assuming it was going to be that high, but I would have thought when you said city, we're talking like 25,000 people or more at this time.
That'd be unusually big. Probably the average city, if there is an average city, is maybe 5,000 to 10,000 people in the ancient world.
Okay, that's not a crazy number then.
2,000. No. And because again, it's so hard to supply these places unless you're right on the seaboard and you have this huge trade network. Probably 95% of people live in the countryside. Well, 90%. Quite a few.
What were the biggest cities besides Rome, like in this time period, in the 1st century AD?
After Rome, it's Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria. Antioch, exactly. Ephesus in Turkey is quite large. Smyrna, also in Turkey, is big. A few of the cities in France, like Lugdunum, Lyon,
Lyon
is quite big.
Wow.
There's probably a few dozen cities that are above 50,000, But Rome is far and away the megalopolis.
Right. And the culture of Rome is spread very, very heavily into all those cities.
Well, yes and no. So in the western part of the empire, so everything west of Greece, Roman culture becomes high culture. Latin becomes the language spoken by all the elite. Pottery made and used in Rome is exported throughout the empire. Roman styles predominate. The Roman gods become dominant. But in the eastern half, Greek culture remains predominant. Because there's already Greek Greek had become the lingua franca across that area under the Hellenistic kings before Rome even showed up. Rome had kind of a blank slate in Western Europe. There were these small tribal communities that didn't have an urban civilization. When the Romans show up and impose that, their template becomes the template. But in the East, you have these much older societies. And so in Greece and Asia Minor, Greek is still the language. In Syria, it's still Aramaic and Syriac in a lot of cases.
Wow.
And so even in Egypt, where they're speaking Greek as the administrative language, people are still speaking Egyptian, Coptic, the ancient Egyptian language until late antiquity.
Right. So Rome has...
Rome never imposes its culture.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's really local elites who decide they're going to adopt elements of Roman culture to assimilate for their own reasons to this ruling power.
So it seems like, even again, you do have emperors at the middle of this. You do have conquering. Like, you got slavery across the empire. Like, there's plenty of, like, totalitarian aspects for sure. But there is another softer side, if you will, that comes through when you compare it to other empires of a totalitarian type, where there is a real, I guess, encouragement to maintain some culture and everybody gets along.
Yeah, there's no ideology in Rome until it becomes Christian. Before that, the Romans don't really care what you do as long as you maintain the peace and pay your taxes. And so they're kind of hands off. It's a libertarian paradise. It's one of these things where...
Don't tell the libertarians that. Yeah. They're going to run nuts with that.
Yeah, right. Where, of course, if you rebel, your head's coming off. But...
that's not very libertarian.
That's not, no. Yeah, hands off my head.
That's right.
But... it's one of these things that most ancient empires, unless they have this ideological bent, they are very loose states, kind of weak states by our modern definition. A modern nation state like America is so vastly more powerful and invasive in both good and bad ways. It gives much more, but takes much more from its people than any ancient empire did. They just didn't have the capacity for that sort of thing.
Did they have like an IRS?
It was so disorganized, it seemed. They were like regional tax. So every city collected its own taxes, pretty much. And then officials would come and take them from the cities. And so really every city would appoint, there would be external tax collectors, but the richest guys in every city were responsible for gathering the taxes. And if they fell short, they had to pay out of their own pocket. So they had an incentive to be on top of... they were tax farmers, they were called. They were third parties, like private merchants who would collect taxes for the empire. This is in the Republican period mostly, and they were wildly corrupt because their profit was whatever they took beyond what they were supposed to. So they would charge 10 for me and 10 for the emperor, or 10 for Caesar or whatever.
What about when they ran into like the "Don't tread on me" people? Like, did they have an army behind them that could help them?
I mean, they had the Roman army. The Roman army was behind them because they were state agents. So and it actually did happen. So they sparked a huge revolt, these guys. You've heard maybe of King Mithridates?
Yes.
So he was a king in what's now northern Turkey. And, he saw how much resentment there was against the Romans and their tax farmers. They were taking so much money. And so he sent agents. He invaded the province of Asia, what's now western Turkey, and pretty much massacred all the Romans he found, 80,000 of them in a single day. Because
80,000 people.
Him and everyone who was around joined in the fun. It's like, oh, the Romans are, getting butchered. Thank God, because they're taking all of our money and, being these vicious, overlords. And he pulled away a large part of the Eastern Empire from the Romans for a few years before Sulla, the future dictator, came in and destroyed his army. The emperors, part of their rationalization of the empire was to realize that you couldn't use tax farmers. They were just too corrupt. You had to use the cities themselves to collect taxes and have officials who wouldn't have incentive to be, taking too much off the top. And so after that, taxes were, they were higher and later on. but they were never high by modern standards. You're probably talking, again, ballpark, something like 10% of your crop or something might be taken.
That's not crazy.
Well, it's not. And, but again, if you had a bad year, it's the same 10%. And so it could become very invasive.
Oh, so it wasn't progressive.
Right. So
if I make 300K or if I make 30K,
it's still, 15K or whatever it is. Yeah. So, they try later on to have these standards. Like, so every person pays a certain amount, every amount of land of a certain fertility pays a certain amount. They try to make it, rationalized, but it's never really works out. There aren't enough censuses to keep
there's too much data.
So much data. And they're, all of their records are a few papyrus rolls in the governor's office 100 miles away. Again, not enough.
Yes, sir, the plot of land tier 7 out in Syria in the Etruscan Valley is very good for the cattle.
Right. Again, not enough pigeons.
Yeah. Pigeons. Yeah. Well, I can go catch you a couple out here.
Yeah, right.
We'll be good. You ever seen a pigeon crip walk?
No. Actually.
Oh, they can.
Really?
Yeah. Again, I'm team pigeon. I know pigeons are smart as fuck.
I did a video about pigeons in ancient Rome, and actually it was like a pigeon's paradise. All that stone architecture, which they love, of course. They're nesting. They
probably ate that shit up. Yeah.
Oh, they did. And the Romans would keep them. They'd have dove cots, up on their roofs. Those like stone shelters.
Oh yeah.
There are pigeon fanciers all over the place. Yeah, they're all about pigeons.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here